Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Follycast, the Rivers of London podcast. I'm Margaret in Sutton, and joining me today are
Richard in Fulham,
Jan in Worcester,
and Jennie in Muswell Hill.
So the latest Rivers of London novel is out. Over the last year or so, we've had a novella, a collection of short stories, and the graphic novels to keep us interested in the world of Peter Grant. But now, after 2.5 years, we have the Motherlode, a 404-page novel, the 9th in the series, called Amongst Our Weapons. We've all read it and we're all ready to go, but we haven't discussed our thoughts before the pod to keep things fresh. So we really don't know where this conversation is going to go, other than it will definitely contain some spoilers. So if you haven't read it, you may want to put this pod aside until a later date. So let's dive in with a quick synopsis. So what did happen in Amongst Our Weapons?
Well, we're still in 2016, not long after the events of False Value. Beverly is nearly ready to give birth, and as she expands, so does the Folly. A new recruit is on board in the form of Danny Wickford, and she and Peter are investigating a strange death at the London Silver Vaults. It's a complex tale in which it becomes gradually apparent that an avenging angel, created by the magical wing of the Spanish Inquisition, is murdering members of a religious group that formed at Manchester University in the 80s. And who discovered and wear a set of enchanted rings that help her track them down. After a second murder and a showdown with the angel, we then have a rare trip outside London as Peter, Danny and Sewell venture up north to pursue leads. We meet Lady Caroline again, who conveniently is partnered with Grace, who's head of the Sons of Wieland, magical blacksmith referenced in past books, who've been storing a lantern. Along the way, we visit Sewell's childhood area, and Peter helps to free the ghosts of World War II airmen trapped in the hills.
Leslie's back as a freelance thief, and it turns out that she stole the lantern from the Sons of Wayland and freed the Angel of Death inadvertently from its century-long prison inside it. Peter and Leslie run into each other across the book at lots of cross purposes, until Peter eventually traps Leslie in a Marvel-style team-up at the Folly to free the possessed angel. Peter takes one of his trips into the magical realm to understand how and why the Spanish Inquisition created the Angel of Death in the first place, and how she became trapped in the lantern until she was freed. Finally, Peter and Beverly's twins are born in a purpose-built rivulet in the back garden with a mass audience of rivers and relatives. Nightingale talks about expanding the Folly into an academy and announces his intention to retire in the near future, meaning more responsibility for Peter. But Leslie is still very much at large. So let's dive in with overall impressions before we talk more about various aspects of the book. What did we make of Amongst Our Weapons? Jan?
I loved it. I really felt a sort of richness of it. I think we'd been waiting quite a long time for this one, and so I wasn't sure what to expect. But yeah, from the get-go, I thought it was full of action and interest. I felt that there was a real richness to the familiar characters, and I really liked the new characters that were introduced. So I found plenty to like about this one.
Yeah, I loved it too. Somewhat to my surprise, I think. And I even found it quite jolly and joyful. Joyful in particular because this is now the Folly family. They're no longer suspicious of each other. They relate to each other very well. I thought that was particularly true of Sewell, who we got to know much better than we've known before, and Khalid, and the introduction of Danny into the mix was extremely good. There was also quite a lot of quite good explainers, breakouts into the history of the Folly, going right back to Casterbrook and Newton and before that, the history in as far as it's ever possible to tell of the Spanish Inquisition, which set me off doing all sorts of reading around the Spanish Inquisition. I loved the Monty Python theme. Although I did worry that it might be difficult for certain reading groups to get kind of that familiar with it. And also I got very cross that he included one Monty Python line that's actually not from the Spanish Inquisition. It's from the working class playwright sketch rather than Spanish Inquisition. But that intrigued me as well, the way that all the chapter heads were quotes from the Spanish Inquisition. As you know, if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, I'm a huge fan of Leslie, despite her betrayals of the Folly. And I thought she was brilliantly reintroduced, particularly in the final conversations with Peter, when she said, "I'm not redeemable," and seemed to think it's a bit of a joke. So you know that she's going to be around still in some fashion, and she won't be redeemable, which is interesting. I was very upset about a Nightingale deciding to retire, but I thought, well, I did that and I haven't actually retired. So, so I don't expect him to disappear. And it's just a lot of fun and interest, and the plot I found much easier to follow than previously. I don't know why. I think it was quite single-minded and sequential. So you kind of got a very strong storyline.
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, I wasn't as down on False Value as some people were. My expectation was that False Value was kicking off a whole new cycle. In hindsight, that's completely wrong, as After Am. And actually, particularly the birth at the end and everyone gathered together in the garden, that really did feel like the end of something, a positive end, with a couple of things floating around, like what's going to happen to the Folly and Leslie's still out there. But you could almost imagine them now skipping forward 5 years. I'm interested in the fact that I think he says, I plan to retire in 5 years, which would be now, or late 2021. So they could skip through, avoid the pandemic, and come right up to date with, whatever. Yeah, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but even at the end of Lie Sleeping, quite clearly, the next book had to follow on straight away, as did this one, because Beverly was still pregnant. The birth scene felt not quite a full stop, but certainly a punctuation point. You could imagine it skipping forward, but.
I imagine it's also quite difficult to carry on now without any kind of reference to the pandemic. So actually skipping forward 5 years would make that possible. I saw one mention of PPE, which is obviously clearly out of time in this book. But how you manage to avoid any reference to it at all because you're still 5 years behind it is really quite difficult.
At the rate that these books progress, and the fact he's writing them every 2 years. Or publishing every 2 years, they're going to get, it's almost going to become historical fiction. I mean, 2016 is 6 years ago now. He's going to be quite careful about what his pop culture reference points are and all that sort of stuff. That's my theory, that this was actually the end of a cycle. And
I absolutely loved it. I think because he had to condense it with the birth at the end, it meant that it happened quite quickly and it was quite tight in terms of what actually happened.
It was 1 week, wasn't it?
It was less than a week, yes, and it's done by days, whereas if you think Foxglove Summer, he's out there for about 2-3 weeks, and this had to be quite tight just because of the nature of Bev having the babies, and she was very close to having the babies in the last book. So for the babies to be at the end, he had to be across a week. I had no objections with them going up to Manchester. I quite liked that. I liked the fact that although there are lots of characters that were part of the story, it felt that other characters had more to do, like particularly Sewell. I loved all that, his backstory and the going up with Peter and what he says to Peter. I love the fact how Leslie was weaved in, and the foxes. I haven't got a thing about the foxes, but how that all happened was done quite well. And for me, the history was good, but it wasn't too much of it. And I like that Post Martin did it rather than Peter, and that made a bit more sense. Because Peter doesn't know, hopefully, everything, if you see what I mean, whereas before a lot of this landed on Peter. And I like the fact that it finished at the Folly as well. There has been odd things at the Folly, but to actually have the final big thing at the Folly, I think was quite interesting in itself. And then to your point, Richard, that might lead to that sort of jump forward.
Yeah, it really does, as we were discussing, I think, a week or two ago, it really does, to me, make it clear that Monday was just published too early. Yeah. And they contractually, they had to get it out. If Monday came out now, that would make the most sense. It would be like a coda after this book, wouldn't it? The actual plot, the whole thing around the Avenging Angel and the rings, Manchester University and the Spanish Inquisition, what was it? Was it intriguing? What were your views on that?
It did hold together, I think, better than some earlier plots. we seem to pick up clues along the way that's just increased what we understood about it. We started off by not understanding anything. The Sons of Wayland we had come across before, hadn't we?
Yeah.
But not particularly the archive and its absence. I don't remember.
No.
And curiously, I read something in The Guardian the day I started the book about Wayland Smithy, and what an interesting place it was to go and visit. So I thought, that's interesting. Is that where it came from?
Well, also Wayland was a Nordic character, I think connected to Beowulf or something. It's a myth,
really?
The myth of Wayland the blacksmith.
Yeah,
He sounds like a very unlikable character from what I've seen on Wikipedia. But so that again, yeah, you're right. He's linked to Wayland Smithy.
Yeah.
I think it's named after him. Yeah,
I thought it grew quite organically. Didn't feel, we're in a university and now we're back at the Spanish Inquisition, and it felt as if it was sort of revealed in a way that you thought, okay, so that group, and he found a book and got intrigued, and the bits of the sort of magic, that they referred to, the glamour and all this, were all bits that we could reference from before.
Yeah.
That's what I thought was brilliant about this book, that it really did, I feel, build on the stuff that had gone before in all the other books. And like Jennie, I felt that the humour, post-Martin's sort of jokes and the sort of playfulness between the characters, that was done, it felt really relaxed and genuine because it had built up over time. But I thought the story itself, even though you'd got this, long strand going back to the Inquisition, I thought it worked really, really well.
I like the overall plot. I still do think, though, that, and it's a price worth paying. It's a price worth paying to have a first-person narrative, because I think that's really what makes the books so successful. And it wouldn't be anywhere near as good if it's a third-person narrative. But for me, we always seem to hit a point about 2/3 of the way through the book where there is a chapter where my head nearly bursts when, in this case, post-Martin, there's a massive dump of exposition, and I can see Margaret shaking her head. She disagrees. I think she liked that one, but for me, I need to take notes here. I'm losing it a bit. That's because we've discussed before. That's because Peter has to learn it as we learn stuff. There always seems to be a point when Peter has to have something explained to him at length, and that's always the bit where you almost like batten down the hatches and secure the deck chairs and get through the storm and come out the other side and hope that I've understood what's going on.
I don't agree. But I think compared to some of the other expositions that we've had, it was quite short and it wasn't too detailed, and it came at the right point for me. And okay, yes, I was interested in it, but there were some fascinating things. I liked the fact that Leslie was integral to the plot in that some of the things that she did actually made things happen. That it was Leslie stealing the lamp. Sad in itself actually caused the actual story in its sense, because it released the angel. What she actually did actually led to the circumstances of the two people dying at the beginning of the book. I thought the plot moved fairly quickly, going back to the point about pace. And for me, I don't like the let's put Peter back in history. So that was only a page and a half, whereas before it has been pages, you know what I mean? Like he's gone back, met Mr. Punch and stuff like that.
I thought that, like Margaret, I thought this one handled that really well, yes. the first third person narration, because it wasn't just post-Martin.
No.
It was a sequence of well-informed people. And it just seemed to be much more seamless. I didn't find it as noticeable this time as I've found it before. But also, I figured that Aaronovitch is having to prepare for more of this because Peter's not going to be around maybe for the next book that much. So they need to find a way to keep him informed with the third-party experts.
Unless they skip forward 5 years.
Yeah, that's true.
In theory, the next book would have Gilead doing her paternity cover.
Yeah, or they might just do it at the point when Peter's kids go to school.
One part of the story that I didn't think was necessary, and I wonder whether it was just there because it could only be told by Peter, which is the ghostly pilots. I didn't really. I loved that, but equally thought this is like a short story inserted in, or a novella.
I agree with Jennie. That slightly jarred a bit. That section, I think. I could see if it was on a programme or a film, it might be quite moving, but just there on the page, I agree with Jennie. I felt the backstory to the Inquisition, I think, was necessary to the plot, really, so that it made some sort of sense.
Yeah.
Who was chasing whom and how, the Angel of Death emerged. Otherwise, I think that was a good way, I thought, of explaining, just taking a little section of the backstory to say, well, he was after him, that was his nemesis, and he got him back. He managed to put her in this lamp and then painted a picture to say, up yours to the Spanish Inquisition. That was a bit Monty Pythonish, I thought.
One of the things that the book does progress, we get more and more explanations of things, and it's also that we seem to be getting more and more towards Peter trying to almost scientifically explain magic or dissect it and understand what things are. And I know Nightingale isn't overly keen on him trying to sort of bring magic into the rational world. But there's this word that they coined in this book, which I don't think is in the previous books, called alakosmoi, which is what he described as...
We've come across it, isn't it?
Yeah, other dimensions of existence. And then there's a debate about whether it's a different dimension or a tertiary subspace domain. These things that he often enters that Margaret never likes him entering, but we have at least now got a label for them, and the idea that the fairy realm that they went to at the end of Foxglove Summer is the same sort of thing, that there's these realms, planes of existence in parallel.
There's one point when he talks about he's worried how confused Danny will get, and Gulid says, oh, I shouldn't worry about it, she'll soon realise that it's all bonkers.
So Leslie's back. I guess we were kind of hoping that this would happen in our preview episode, but did it deliver?
I think it did. It was quite interesting, though, that when Danny's talking to Peter quite early on, they talk about Covent Garden. And she references Covent Garden, and I thought, hey ho, this might bode well. And then 5 or 6 pages later, the foxes turn up with a note for Peter from Leslie. I liked it. I thought it was well done. I thought there was little elements about all the way through, and then as you get towards the end, she's in it a fair bit with the scene at the homeless charity, and then obviously at the Folly at the end. And even though she's doing all of this stuff, that she's still got Peter's back, sort of, because she sent him the note in the first place, that she's trying to warn him, and that she does get out of the Folly, but you can also see that she's supporting him in a way, but he's still going to stay on the dark side, if you see what I mean. So I was really pleased, actually, and really pleased that the majority of the characters were recurring characters, and all the other characters were just important for the plot, or ones that we'd seen before, like Caroline. So for me, I thought the fact that Leslie had more space in the novel was really, really good, and picked up not that far after she disappeared, if you think about it. It's only about 3 months later since she disappeared at the end of Lie Sleeping, really.
It's strange, isn't it? Because for us, it's like 5 years since she's had any significant presence in the books.
I liked the characterization of, she's on the dark side. She says she's irredeemable, but, she saves Peter. And Peter also explains it in a very logical way. I thought, well, we've got this connection. So whatever's happened, she's still going to call me an idiot. If I've done something wrong, she'll call me out, but she's not going to actually want to see me dead, or so I thought that links back to right at the beginning, the first book, when they had that connection, and that's still there. So that was quite I liked that aspect of the relationship that was explored. And the bit when he says, when her face changed again, I thought he did that in a really quick, simple, clear way, but explained that she's still the horror of what happened to her. That was sort of reminder.
Yeah, I thought it was done really well. I particularly liked her reintroduction to the Folly and their preparations, the lovely touch about moving Molly and Toby out of the way because they'll be able to smell her. And that kind of stuff. I thought it was really, really well done. So our expectations of her now, I think, are rather different, that we're not expecting her to be redeemable in any sense. But it did make me question about whether she would have saved Nightingale if she was in a position to do that and Peter wasn't around. Maybe that will come up next.
I'm the complete opposite to Margaret in the sense that when, at the very start of the book, we get a couple of references to Leslie, and well, I don't think he names her to Danny, but he certainly talks about it. Yeah, presumably because there's an element of, I mean, perhaps subconsciously he's concerned about, going forward, you would be concerned about partners if your former partner had something that horrific happen. But the fact when he mentioned it, I thought, oh well, that she's not going to be in this book then.
No,
because the surprise is gone. Whereas it's almost like a double bluff in the sense that, to me, I thought, well, the fact that, if she was going to be in this book, she would appear out of nowhere with no one having mentioned her before. But of course, I was probably applying TV and film logic to it as opposed to book logic, where in a book it has to make sense. So, I mean, we've read all 9 books in the last 18 months, whereas a lot of people picking this up won't have read a Rivers of London book for 2.5 years.
Or at all.
Or at all, potentially.
So I was thinking about that this morning. So if you haven't read any Rivers of London books, what would this mean to you?
I think it would be intriguing. I think you'd enjoy it, and then you'd desperately want to go back and read the other ones because it's something we're going to come on to. But I mean, in the last, when we were reviewing False Value, I know, Jennie, but you said that there were something like, was it 25 new named characters introduced or something? Well, in this one, we've got, and this is a rough count, I mean, I went on the Follypedia website, I think we've got over 30 named returning characters, plus over 20 new characters. So that
the new characters are in the 16th century.
Yeah, I'm not even counting them. I'm just including characters in the modern day. So I think anyone reading it would have, even if it is explained who they all are, would get the impression that I'm really enjoying this. They'd probably hinge more on the plot than we would, because they wouldn't be picking up all the significance of the references to people and, characters and
talking foxes.
You'd hope that the central avenging angel plot would get you through, and you'd be intrigued by talking foxes and what the backstory and want to go off and explore. And
I think it would be tricky because Sewell is a completely different character from the in like books 2 and 3. Khalid is developed a lot more. I think there's a whole lot in that relationship that you wouldn't understand the backstory of some of those relationships without having read some of the previous books, I would say, or you wouldn't enjoy it or get that understanding of some of the comments that Sewell makes and the sort of journey he's been on since this has all started.
When very minor characters come back with very, very minor parts, like Zach.
Yes.
You think, what?
Who's he?
But in a way, you don't need to know he's been in previous books. What's alienating is when the character says, yes, this is X, and I remember when I first encountered them when I was doing this. Ironically, one of the few back references of that type is to Q again. This thing that happened in Q, that the joke is that we're learning more and more.
Oh yes, the two of the police officers, the ones that are out, they clock him outside the house, don't they, in Q when he goes and see Althea Moore.
Oh yeah. But yes. Q, I don't know. So what happened in Q? That's not been in a novel, has it?
No, it's almost like a joke. A running joke is that we don't know what happened in Q, and in every book we get some reference to it that adds to it. This time, whatever it was
Tiffany. It was Tiffany that he worked. He worked.
Yes, whatever it was, it required an emergency response team to extricate him from Q. So whatever it was.
So is that ever? Are we ever going to get that, or is it?
Presumably, by the end of the book series, we'll be able to do a word search and pin it all together. But to me, Leslie is kind of where I thought she would be, in that she is kind of performing a similar role in a number of sort of fictional ongoing series have them, of someone who is kind of between the darkness and the light, and often ends up reluctantly teaming up with the main characters to defeat a bigger evil, a bit like, Margaret might know the reference, a bit like Spike in Buffy. They're clearly irredeemable, as Leslie puts it, but you're glad to see them back, and they can team up, and and that ending was very Marvel, wasn't it? Avengers Assemble, when you had Gilead doing her ninja moves and Leslie and Peter doing their magic and Nightingale doing the final coup de grace or whatever. It was very, very superhero.
There are a couple of new characters that look like they will carry on, as opposed to characters that are just part of the plot itself. So we've got Danny and Grace and potentially the river in Glossop. But any of these well drawn for you or of interest to you?
I like Danny. I thought that she sort of slotted in nicely in between Abigail's not quite ready to function properly. So she came in as a trainee, and I thought you needed a character that was a bit different from Leslie, but she'd got that sort of same almost level of confidence that even though she doesn't understand about the magic and all this, she seemed to have a real presence about her. And I thought the little joke about when they went to the market and he sort of implied, oh, she bought a whip. Well, I won't ask any questions about that. So you sort of think, oh, she's got another life going on and she's not going to be just trailing after him, not knowing what's going on. So I felt I like what I saw of her. And also Gilead said something to Peter about she won't like being underestimated, when he wondered how much he needed to tell her. And I thought, oh, that's just giving you a little bit more, this is a fully formed character, but obviously we're not going to see the full extent of her yet. But I thought what he sort of seeded here, I thought was very good.
At one point early on, I thought, this character is going to be pretty central to the plot. They're either going to be undercover or betray at the final moment. I couldn't work out quite why they were there, but she wasn't, and she's clearly on board. And it's in the nature of the books, and you talked a lot about family and particularly the ending and everything, but it occurs to me, and stop me if I'm wrong, but across the 9 books, I don't think anyone other than the baddies or members of the public have actually ever died. We meet more and more characters who come on board, and we get to know, and we've got 3 or 4 more, and it would be a real shock if someone were to die in this series that we know now, because it just hasn't happened. None of the regulars are going to die. It's not that sort of a series. I think that's probably what we quite like about it, in that you can read these books and it is a bit like coming home.
In that, isn't they?
The rolling stone of accumulating characters is gathering a hell of a lot of moss at the moment. We must be up to about 40, 50 named people who crop up in the books. It's just a lot to juggle.
I felt I wanted to know a bit more about her, actually, to Jan's point. I thought, and your point, Richard, I thought it was good that she was introduced at the beginning, and she's a good sort of somebody for Peter to explain to what's going on. But then at key points, her and Sewell are off somewhere or doing something else. Do you see what I mean? She's involved in some of the sort of incidents. She's quite good when the attack of the Angel in Kensal Green, Kensal Rise on the canal boat and stuff like that. But I just felt like she got to find out a bit, and there was one bit where she questioned about Nightingale saying he knew somebody, and she starts to work out how old Nightingale potentially might be, but nobody tells her anything more than that. So I thought she was good. I thought it was a really good character, but I thought maybe she could have done with a little bit more explanation about her, or some way to involve her a little bit more than apart from just being there running around. Or maybe she's in a position that perhaps Gilead was in about 6 books ago, that you don't know that much more about her. But I would like to know a little bit more.
I think Jan was right. She did seem fully formed, to the extent that I didn't realise until, I don't know, half a dozen mentions of her that I hadn't come across her before.
No.
And I wonder whether it's significant that she came from Kingston, which is where Peter and Beverly are.
True.
Maybe we'll find that out. So I don't know where she came from, how she came to be in the Folly.
Perhaps she may turn out to be a mole in later books or something, but
if, in case we expect this to be realistic, we've got no corrupt cops, we've got no racist cops, we've got no misogynist cops. So this is not real life.
But
Well,
there is
a
an
slight
insider
bit.
cop that we don't know, because somebody is
there is an
giving
insider,
Leslie information, because
Yeah.
she knows exactly what's going on.
Maybe it is Danny.
Gleed and Peter remark on the fact that within minutes on a stakeout, the police are approaching them because.
Oh yeah, that's true.
It's
I
not
bet we don't have any
not-
mentions of Charing Crossnick anymore.
No, it's not
It's Belgravia, they mentioned.
Belgravia, yeah.
So what do we think about the development of our core characters? So in this, I'm including Peter, Nightingale and Beverly.
Actually, I'm much more interested in Pete's mother, who
Yes.
now seems to be completely a member of the Pete in-laws. And I really, really, really enjoyed that, especially her presence at the birth, which if that's not one of your list of questions, I thought it was supremely well handled and not very much detail. Thank you.
Yes, I know what you mean.
And
Yes.
Peter's dad has been sent to the Folly to be
that was lovely.
Yes, I loved it. Looked after by Molly.
It's
I
become
think
quite
a
safe house, hasn't it?
Yeah,
For
it is.
all sorts of reasons.
But also the increasing closeness of the relationship between and understanding of each other of Nightingale and Pete, which is why he invites Pete's dad into the Folly. I just liked it was just all going in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay, so what elements of the book did you most enjoy, and what parts of the books do you think didn't work so well?
Leslie, most enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure anything failed to work, but I think there was some stuff was extraneous, including the ghostly pilots.
Yeah, I thought I was going to say that I didn't really see how valuable it was to have the sort of the magic market, but on reflection, I think that was quite useful because it gave you a little bit of the, we need more space, the sort of practicalities. It wasn't just the magic going on, but the bit that where it crosses over into the real world. But as a sort of scene, I was quite anxious to get back to the main thread of the story. But all the Spanish Inquisition, the university, that whole thread, I loved. I thought it worked really, really well.
Just so for me, I enjoyed pretty much all of it. I thought it was quite well paced. I could cope with the scenes in Glossop. I liked how they followed the trail once they got up to Manchester from the library to Glossop to back down to London. So I don't think there was much in it in terms of exposition and how it was written that I objected to at all, really. I just loved that Leslie was interweaved all the way through it, which I wasn't expecting, and was an utter joy to actually have, which was nice for me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I particularly like the end. That did give me a warm feeling of, I really enjoy this series. I guess my one criticism, it's not really a criticism, I don't know what it is, but it's just, I think with this book more than any of the others, it did start to dawn on me that none of these characters are particularly at risk. And therefore there is, and I referred to it a bit.
You're missing the jeopardy.
It's too cosy.
I mean, there is a lot of jeopardy, but you know that it's almost like the characters themselves have signed up for all 10 books, like that, as if they're actors. That they're going to be there because they've signed up for the whole series, and therefore they're going to get into trouble and they're going to get out of trouble. And when I mentioned about Monday, the problem I had with Monday was it meant that the characters who were in Monday clearly were not going to get in any way damaged or hurt by what happened in Amongst Our Weapons, and that transpired. What didn't occur to me was that none of the 40 main returning characters were at any particular risk of not surviving this book. So and I'm not calling for some bloodthirsty cull of like when in Coronation Street when a train crashes off the viaduct into the creek.
That's the only thing that ever happens. It's always the train crashing off the viaduct.
Yeah, and it's always because three or four characters the actors' contracts are up. The trouble is, after 9 books it would feel a bit weird were that to happen, to be honest.
Maybe that's because we've already had one who's been immensely damaged.
Yeah.
Right from book 1.
I mean, I know she thinks she's irredeemable, but even she is on a gradual path back to redemption, isn't she? I bet.
I don't think so.
No.
We'll see. Well, that kind of leads.
I'm sort of with Richard. I feel it's been dangling there that possibly there might be a way back.
Well, I mean, I guess that kind of leads into our final sort of question, which is, where do we go from here? Where would you like to go?
I think you're right, Richard. This is probably the time when we have to move forward to make it more contemporary and to give the kind of the clean opening slate to Peter to start off as head of the Folly. That does mean we're going to have quite a lot of backstory, but it can be told by Peter.
Yeah.
And also it can be told by the graphic novels and short stories. The next book could be set 5 years in the future, but they could have plenty of reasons to do stories set in that gap if they want to, novellas and short stories and things like that. The joy of podcasts is they're there on Spotify or iTunes for the next 20 years. So people will be going, what on earth were they going on about? And when it turns out the next book is set the next morning after the...
To Jenny's point, I hope that Nightingale is still in the books, even if it's only in an advisory capacity. I don't think the books would be as good without him in it some way. I know he's not always central to the plot all the time, but I do think he is, for me.
Don't you think if he's setting up this sort of academy or whatever,
yeah,
he's always going to be there as a
I think so. And
drawn in.
And in, again, plot spoilers, he's doing that, isn't he, in Monday, isn't he? He started his little training college. But yeah, I mean, I hope Leslie would still be in it. And I don't know. Or the other point is false value are like an outlier, or is there's going to be some way that those sort of two sort of themes converge? Because that would be interesting to know as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we didn't get much of this. There was 2 or 3 references to, like at one point he says, a mechanical computer do wish it to the fabric of space-time, and I thought there was something huge and alien looking at me. We didn't really pick up that thread much in this book, did we?
No, and that's only happened a couple of weeks before this book, hasn't it? So he's almost like he set 2 various paths that it could. But the other interesting thing, if it does jump 5 years, Abigail will be an adult, which would be interesting in itself. Because to Jan's point, she's sort of not in this book, but she gets things to do. But she would be at the point that she might join the police force, or she doesn't, and she sort of follows more of a route of something else, but still be a magic practitioner. I
would like to see much more of Beverly. I think inevitably Beverly has been sidelined over the last 2 books as just someone he goes home to. It'd be interesting to see, because particularly the exploration of her powers, and there's a few references here. At one point, Peter's ruminating on the fact, almost like it's only just occurred to him that within months of hooking up with Beverly, suddenly his dad is a former heroin addict, and the implication being that she's worked some magic on him, which again would help if they skip forward 5 years, because Peter and Beverly could pack the kids off to school at least during the day, or primary school or whatever. The only other thing I'd mention is there is one thing we do know, which is that the next novella is a Kimberly Reynolds book set in the States.
That's what all those questions on Twitter.
Well, yeah, exactly. But,
do you think she could be hunting down the last member of the Manchester Seven then?
Packard.
Well,
Packard.
I wonder if it's going to be a Agent Reynolds and Leslie novella.
Oh, that would be good. So that's what we thought about Amongst Our Weapons. The next Rivers of London book is scheduled to be a novella featuring Agent Reynolds. So we're keeping an eye out for that in the next few months.
If you've enjoyed the podcast, please send us feedback by email at follypodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment on our website, thefollycast.com. Follycast theme that you've been hearing is London is Inspired by Cutwater. Links to their site are in the show notes, and in breaking news, they have a new EP out on Spotify on May the 6th called The Brutal Light. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.
gonna